Hello everyone, it's your favorite West Virginia out in space here, and it's no secret that MatPat leaving YouTube was a sad and touching moment for many of us on YouTube, and I can even owe part of my reason for being on YouTube to him, so, obviously it meant quite a bit to me. And recently I discovered apparently there was, several different endings that he gave for the channel that I did not know, because I never followed the GT live thing, I just never did. And I watched them all, I thought it was very fun, and I thought since very few people talked about it, even during the whole, height of everyone being sad about him leaving and everything, I thought that today in this video I would give an overview of them, and just a little secret mystery and some theories that I don't think people have picked up on, because I think MatPat might have left something in these endings that I don't think anyone's picked up on yet. So anyway, let's begin. Now, to explain what these endings are, basically MatPat, from what I can gather, during his last few streams, left little ARG codes that could be found to find each ending. There were 6 in total, and after all 6 were discovered, that Game Theory eventually put them up on the YouTube channel for you to just watch in a playlist rather than track them all down individually. This is very convenient for me, as it makes everyone's job a lot easier. And specifically, there are 6 endings, going in order loosely. There is the Chaos ending, Insanity ending, Meme ending, Horror ending, the Lore Keeper ending, and the Real ending. And I thought I'd go over them because when you put them together, you start finding something kind of interesting. Let's start off with the Real ending. The Real ending is basically just the actual send-off to Game Theory. Filled with touching moments and, sweet moments and all that jazz. Very touching, very nice. The Chaos ending is pretty much the exact opposite, where unlike in the Real ending, where we see how much his crew mattered to MatPat and everything, MatPat and his wife go off to the beach to live, who knows, in a peaceful life, while the entirety of Game Theory descends into chaos and anarchy. And as funny as those two endings are, especially since they put at the extreme end of the video, something interesting immediately popped up to me when thinking about it. Specifically that they're kind of like the good and bad endings, aren't they? How like in a video game, how like you'll have like the really good ending, really bad ending. And that's where something clicked to me, is that that's kind of like a video game extreme kind of ending, isn't that? It's kind of funny, isn't it? But all this got a lot more complicated when I viewed specifically the second ending known as the Insanity ending, which is kind of the whole crux of what I'm going to get into today. Specifically in this ending, to give a brief overview of the whole thing, MatPat basically has a mental breakdown where he basically imagines that he's a animatronic / robot, as he calls it, and his wife's a robot, and his wife doesn't believe him, and he runs away, and he's just laughing maniacally as he looks to the screen saying, "Do you want to be a robot too?" gesturing to us, the audience. Now, this would all be a funny, silly ending about how MatPat goes insane because he's made too many FNAF theories, except for one small detail, is that MatPat's voice changes at the end. The last sentence sounded clearly artificial, which implies / reveals that MatPat didn't actually go insane, or at the very least, he is insane, but was stumbled onto something that he was actually a robot, which implies that he's worried about his wife being a robot, which leads to some implications. Now, overall, this would just be a funny, silly little ending about, MatPat going insane because of all the FNAF theories he made. Until you remember, this is Game Theory, all about game stuff, and video games have the term ending specifically refer to something very different, or at least particular in this context. You see, endings in video games have a particular meaning, in this case being alternate outcomes the player can get in the story, like endings. But these different endings are not just random events or alternate universes necessarily, they are alternate pathways the player can go on. Specifically, like in a video game, you could choose the good ending or the bad ending, but these are still choices you make along the way. By doing more good deeds or bad deeds or completing certain quests or whatever, you get different endings. Now, what makes this particular is that whenever you start a video game, at the very moment you start the game, all endings are theoretically possible. Only through your actions during the game can they be lowered down until you get to the final outcome. However, this means that at the start of a game, there are always pre-made assumptions. There's only this plot's going on, your character starts here, or these events have already occurred. These events are unchangeable because they have already occurred before your player makes choices in the story. However, this also means that certain things you could learn later in the game can be true previously. Like, for example, you've played Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 1, spoiler alert, is that your character was the Dark Lord Revan the entire time. But even though you didn't know that at the start of the game, that has always been the case. So, what if MatPat being a robot is just like that? He has always been a robot, and only in the insanity ending does he learn the truth, that he was in fact always a robot, or at least got turned into it at some point. This gets more interesting, though, as other endings kinda confirm this. This gets next to the Lorekeeper ending, which, as cool as it was to see MatPat meet FNAF's creator and this whole thing, that was an adorable and incredible moment. However, this gets interesting. Scott Cawthon is the man who made the FNAF games. Those same games that, in the Insanity ending, drove MatPat to his insanity/realization, because they're both about robots. Now that's interesting, isn't it? That in one of the potential endings to the story where MatPat can learn or become a robot, that he ends up going to the man who would hypothetically somewhat know about secret conspiracies and robots. Isn't that interesting? And especially with the whole concept of scooping and all these creepy soul transfer that goes on in the FNAF games, not even theories, that's just canon, is that it really leads into the fact that it's suspicious that these two endings would be theoretical possible outcomes. Perhaps one is based purely on how he comes to, what his mental state is when it comes to the realization. If his mental state is good, or his humanity or whatever, like in, say, the real ending, then he's able to hold himself together and go to meet Scott Cawthon to learn the truth. But if his mental state is not good, like in the Chaos ending, then he learns that he goes insane and can't handle the realization properly. Now, this might sound like maybe it's just these two endings connected, but when you look at the last two endings, the pieces of the puzzle really come together. This isn't just a random coincidence. MatPat had an idea of what he was doing here. The next ending that really feeds into this and really puts it all together is the horror ending, or more accurately, the analog horror reference ending, because it's basically an analog horror kind of homage to Sicilia's. In this ending, some entity or being kills MatPat and his wife, as well as one other person we learned from the news broadcast, but we're not sure who that was, before said entity takes over the news broadcast and gives an ominous message to you, and such like that. And that's very much of a classic analog horror ending until you link it with the other endings we've mentioned so far, because we know that MatPat and his wife are, or at least can become, robots. And so this entity that has the ability to control technology has done a targeted attack against two people. It's very interesting that whatever this entity is, which I don't have a solid grasp on, but I'm sure you could probably piece maybe some clues together, there's more to go off of, is targeting these robots or androids in disguise or whatever. In fact, I might be willing to wager that the person we know died earlier might be Scott Cawthon, or the Lorekeeper. He might have specifically died because he knew too much, or whatever force is doing this didn't want that leaking out. And from a video game perspective, I imagine this is a fail state. Some kind of situation where MatPat didn't get enough information or courage or stats or made the wrong choices, and so gets offed in these point of the game. Now, in a lot of video game RPGs, the ending state, failure state like this isn't a normal ending, but remember, he also made a lot of Legend of Zelda theories where the downfall timeline where Link loses is just a canon fact of it / speculate for a long time. So it would make total sense to me that he would reference that or have it in there. This is some kind of downfall-ish timeline for MatPat's robotic adventures. Now, this feeds finally into the last ending, which is the meme ending, which at first I thought was just a pure meme ending. Like, it had no real meaning or significance to this theory. But I decided to kind of go against that. Now, I still think that's possible, and I still personally kind of want to think it's true, but I can't deny the possibility that we know MatPat went insane, at least or partially, in one of the endings. Perhaps this is MatPat who went insane but never learned he was a robot properly, so without any kind of thing for his mind to focus on correctly, it just completely devolved into meme references. Now, when you put all this together, we kind of get an interesting theory that we can kind of suggest that in this hypothetical story or story or theory or video game, or whatever you want to call it, that we'll call it the game theory, last theory story, that there were roughly 3 bars or information being remembered: sanity, knowledge, and goodwill. Goodwill could also be probably labeled a bit like humanity. In some endings, like the real ending, he had high sanity and high goodwill, but low knowledge about his true robotic nature, and so was able to have a good, peaceful life, but never learned the truth. In the chaos ending, he had a high sanity, he was like mentally unstable, and had a low knowledge, like before, but had low goodwill, low humanity, perhaps because he had part of his soul ripped out or whatever, or just simply being made of metal and not flesh, that instead what he left behind devolved into chaos, where he just couldn't care. The insanity ending is where he had low sanity, but had high knowledge of his true nature, but also, in some ways, high goodwill because of he's trying to explain it to people even in his last insanity moments. The Lore Keeper is actually high of all stats. He has a high bit of his sanity, he has a high bit of his goodwill, and a high understanding, or at least good knowledge, of what he is. Good enough that he's able to have healthy relationships with his wife, and then go to Scott Coffin for information. The horror ending, I don't know if it has an exact percentage, and I can't really possibly say. It could just, like I said, it's probably just a fail state, so it might not have an actual, number. And the meme ending is just low across the board, with nothing to anchor MatPat and his descending insanity. He simply devolved into meme references. And if I was going to look at this all together, like I said, I think this is the story of MatPat who got turned or learned he was turned into a robot, and all different ways that can go about in some story fashion. I think what we are seeing is little clip endings of the story we never got to see. Or, when you put it all together, MatPat's last theory. The gift he gave for us. As he said, he wanted to keep people theorizing, and I think this is what he did with this. He wanted there to be one last true theory of MatPat. The true theory of game theory, if you will. And I feel kind of sad that I don't think anyone's picked up on this before. I feel bad that I didn't know about this to pick up on it before. So I made this video in hopes that would get out there. MatPat, I don't agree with everything he thinks or does in the channel, whatever. But he meant a lot to us. In game theory, was a critical part in a lot of our lives, I think. Or at least, not critical, but important, notable, however you want to word that, influential lives. And I'm happy he was there. So, this is to you, MatPat. I really hope that you actually had this theory in your head when you were making all these. Or I'm just an insane cyborg hitting my head against the wall in a spaceship trying to figure out random endings that had no meaning. Or at the very least, you appreciate the creativity. And that's all I really have to say for today. If you have your own thoughts on this theory, please comment, like down below and all that jazz. Dislike if you don't like the video. And I will see you all next time.
Yeah. Hey, why don't you hit that sub button? You're gonna become a subscribble. Get to see my content quicker. Wouldn't that be nice? I bet so.